In this video, I'm going to show you automations that will help you 10x your content output and efficiency using tools like Airtable, Make.com, and ChatGPT. I'll explain how to design your content workflows to repurpose content, and then how to use automations and AI to transform your content into other formats automatically. And not only will I show you step by step how you can actually build these automations, but I will also incorporate ways that humans can be part of that process so they can review and edit content in your process to add value and creativity so that it's not just a mindless step of automations that create content that you wouldn't be proud to publish. The most common mistake I'm seeing with content automation and AI tools is that they try to automate too much with too little human interaction. Now, my name is Stephen Pope, founder of the Content Engine, and over the past 2 years, I've helped hundreds of serious personal brands and content agencies automate and streamline their content systems overnight. So let's do this. So before I jump into Airtable and Make.com to build out these automations, I wanted to go over two concepts, which are content workflows and then content transformation chains, just so you can get a high-level overview, a visual understanding of what I'm talking about. So by now you likely have a content creation process where you're creating videos, images, or text, or all of the above. But once that is created, you need to assign some sort of workflow to that content so that you can perform the necessary edits or write content or create images, create titles, whatever that is, and I call those content transformations. Don't worry, I'll explain a bit more about what that is in a second. And then once you've done all those different transformations, you can actually publish it. In this case, we're going to talk about a YouTube workflow. And so once we've created the thumbnail, edited the video, created the description and the title, we can go ahead and distribute that content. Now, content workflows can also include repurposing instructions. So we can take that YouTube content and then apply a LinkedIn workflow to it so that we can apply the necessary transformations. So if we take a look at LinkedIn, videos are typically in a square format. So if we're taking content that was created for YouTube, we're going to need to transform it into LinkedIn. So these content transformations would include taking that horizontal video that is very typical in the YouTube process and converting that into square. LinkedIn also requires that we have some copy alongside of our video, which is going to differ from our YouTube description. So we need to convert that description into copy that we can post onto LinkedIn. So you can see here what a content workflow does is it just takes raw content, whether that's video, images, text, or all of the above, and it applies some sort of process to those individual pieces of content to prepare for distribution. And it also allows us to define repurposing workflows so we can take that content that we have prepared for YouTube and then we can prepare it for LinkedIn. We can perform the necessary actions and then we can post it to LinkedIn. So we can look at these content transformations or transformation chains in a bit more detail so that you can get a better idea of what those look like. Once we've uploaded a raw video into our content management system, we can then apply a YouTube workflow. And again, I'm going to show you from scratch how to build something like this out. But once we apply that YouTube workflow, there are several things that we need to do to those original assets to prepare for publication. We need to prepare a video, a description, a title, and a thumbnail. And so these individual transformations show and detail how we make that possible. And only when we've executed these transformation chains, you see we have different actions that are chained together to produce a final output, and they have all been reviewed by a person, can we then take that YouTube bundle and publish it to YouTube. So you can see here, we're taking that raw video and we're sending it to a video editor. That video editor is going to edit it, and then we can review that process. If we need changes, we can send that back to the video editor, and that cycle can continue until it's done and ready. And we also need to create that description and title for the video. In this example, I'm going to show you how we can take the raw video, transcribe it, and use ChatGPT to create a description where we can do a manual edit, and then we can review it, and then we can finalize the description for posting. And then we'll also take that transcription, use ChatGPT to create titles where we can do a manual edit, and then we'll have that title ready for publication. And then we'll also create a process where the art designer can come up with a thumbnail, and then someone can review it, and then we can cycle through that process until it's complete, in which case we'll have that thumbnail. And then once all of these different assets are completed, we can then publish it to YouTube. And then we'll continue forward with our repurposing workflow that we came up with in the beginning of this video. And we will take that YouTube video and then perform the necessary transformations to post to LinkedIn. So again, we're going to take that edited YouTube video and we are going to edit it down to a square video. So you might imagine the video editor is going to have to go through here and make sure that there's nothing on the sides of these videos so that they can crop it down to a square format and do any necessary adjustments to make that video perform well on LinkedIn. And then we're going to take that YouTube description and we're going to send it through ChatGPT and do a manual edit and a review so that we can produce the copy for that video. You see the copy that we're going to produce right here. LinkedIn videos don't use a title, so we won't be using the title in this transformation here, but we can also take that thumbnail thumbnail, send it to an art designer who's going to have to crop it into a square. We'll create a review process. And then finally, when it's ready, we can finalize the LinkedIn bundle, which can be published out to LinkedIn. So in review here, we can see that the content workflows will take raw content and help us transform that into whatever we need for distribution. And it will also define what we are going to repurpose into other formats, the transformation for those, and then finally distributing it to the various other platforms. And so the content transformation chains help detail how we take raw content and apply a process to it that can then create a final bundle that can be distributed. All right, so now let's see how we can actually build out this system in Airtable, make.com, and ChatGPT. So here we are in Airtable. I have a brand new project that I haven't made any changes to. I'm gonna go ahead and rename this project to content. I'll just call it workflows. And then I'm gonna come up here to this table here and I'm gonna rename it to content. And then one thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start renaming a few of these fields. I'm gonna rename this to description. I'm gonna turn this into an ID that we can use to differentiate each row from each other. And then I'm going to use this field here to track the content ID when I upload a video into the system. I'm going to turn this into a single line text. And then I'm going to create a status for anything that's in the system here. Let's go ahead and see what we have by default. Change this to automate. Review, done. I might need to adjust that as we go, but I'm gonna go ahead and start there. And then I'm gonna create another field here so I can keep track of who it's assigned to. Now there are a lot of different ways that you can keep track of how something is assigned to a specific user. Airtable does have a concept of an actual user, which will use users that are connected to your account. But in this case, I'm gonna keep it simple, just hard code those in here. So the first thing I'd like is I'd actually like a video to be in this table so that I can start to take some of the next steps. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to come over here and I'm gonna create an inbox so that I can upload videos into the system. So I'm in a Google Drive here. I've got a project folder and I've created an inbox here. And then I'm gonna run over to make.com and I'm gonna create a new scenario and I'm gonna do this on Google Drive. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, watch files in a folder. I'm gonna go ahead and pick my account. You'll wanna pick which account you wanna connect to. In this case, I'm gonna pick the account that I'm working with here. Now we have to select the folder that is to be watched. I'll go to projects, content transformations, inbox, files to watch for, all files. And you can leave this at 2. What it's going to do is only process 2 files each time this automation triggers. So we have this. Let's go ahead and trigger it just to see if it's working. I'll open up Google Drive here. I'll go into the inbox. I will upload a YouTube video. I should have clicked this before I uploaded it, but let's see if we can still trigger the process. It looks like I was still able to trigger it manually. It looks like it found that file. Let's take a quick look at it. Looks like it found our YouTube video. So now all we need to do is just do a little bit of organization in Google Drive, and then also we need to add a new row with the appropriate information into Airtable. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a folder just for that new file, just so we can keep things organized. Again, I'm gonna go to Google Drive. I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to map it to a specific ID. I'm going to jump back over to Google Drive and I'm going to come back to the main project folder. Then I'm just going to grab this ID up at the top, jump back over to make, put that ID in there. And then what I'll do is I'll name that folder based off of the file that was uploaded. So I'm going to come back to step number 1 and I'll just use that original file name, click OK. And then I'll need to move the file from the inbox. If we come back to the inbox here, we have that file. We want to move it to the new folder that we create right here. So I'll come back to make, we'll do another Google Drive automation. We're going to move a file. File ID is going to come from step number 1. So we will go to step number 1. We will grab that file ID and then we are going to move it to the folder that we created in step number 2. So we'll go ahead and click this map button so that we can just enter in an ID. I'll click on this here. And we will go to step number 2 and we will grab the folder ID. And then the final step we need to take is just creating a row in Airtable. So I will go to Airtable. I will create a record. Make sure you pick the right connection. You'll need to add one if you don't have one. I'm going to find workflows and transformations, which is what I named this project. Then we need to select the table. I'm going to go ahead and select the content table. And then we just need to add in the various details that we want to store. In this case, I'll keep track of the description. I'll use the file name, again, the original file name. And then the video ID will be the Google Drive file ID that we got in first step here where we did the upload. Go to step number 1. We'll grab that file ID. We'll leave the status blank and we'll leave the assigned blank as well. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm also going to grab the folder ID just in case I need it. So I'm going to come back over to Airtable. I'm going to add the folder ID, single line text, create that field, come back over here, go back to make.com, we'll do a refresh here. Should pull up that new field. And then we're going to take the folder ID from step number 2, folder ID, and now we are good to go. So that creates our first automation that pulls in new videos that come into the inbox. It's going to create a folder and then move those files into that new folder. And so if we come back to this diagram here, what we're trying to do is we have some sort of raw content that we created in our creation process, and now we need to get it into some sort of CMS so that we can assign some sort of workflow to initiate all of these different transformations that we want to apply to create a YouTube post and then to create a LinkedIn post. So I'll come back to make here, pretty confident that it's going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'll turn it on, and then let's go ahead and just upload another video into the inbox. I'm going to just trash this one. And then let's upload a new video into the inbox. We can come back over to make.com and then we can see if this process actually runs on its own. And if you ever just want to trigger a process on your own because you don't want to wait for any delay, you can always come to the automation and you can say run once, and it looks like it's picking up the entry that I just added and it ran the process. So let's jump back over to Airtable and see what we see here. So we have content ID number 4, we have the description, we have the video ID, and we have the folder ID. Great, so now we are set up to continue forward with our demonstration. We now have a video in the system, and now we can start to build out different workflows so that we can automate these different transformations that need to happen to get us to our final state here. And then that repurposing workflow that also creates that LinkedIn bundle. Now in this process, I'm going to start with the YouTube description and title because that's where we have the most automation in this process for this example. There might be an AI service that we could send out the video for editing, or we might be able to automatically create the thumbnail in Midjourney or some other AI platform for images. But just to show you the process of managing the workflows in Airtable and using make.com and some basic automations around ChatGPT, I'm going to focus on the description and the title so that we can see how those automated workflows would function. It just wouldn't be as interesting if I did a manual review of a video edit in this demonstration. So we're back in Airtable, and I'm already seeing there's a couple different things that we are going to need in order to make this function. I'm going to need something that allows me to assign a workflow. So I'm going to create another select field. I'm going to call it workflow. And then I'm going to create 2 different workflows here. One I'm going to create is the YouTube workflow and the LinkedIn video. And I'm calling it a LinkedIn video because it's pretty obvious that a YouTube video is a video, but LinkedIn has other types of content. Just for consistency, I'll call this a YouTube video and a LinkedIn video. So now we have a workflow column that we can assign an actual workflow to. So now here in our diagram, really the next step is to trigger the next step, which is to trigger the YouTube workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to change this to a YouTube workflow. So now ultimately what we need here is some sort of automation that is triggered here that is going to trigger these different automations. And I'm going to focus in on these ones here. So we're going to need another field, which is the various transformations that need to be executed. And so for that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new table. This one I'm going to call content transformations. I'm going to create an ID here as well. This is the ID for the different transformations that we can have. I'm going to go ahead and do an auto increment as well. That just creates an auto incrementing field. So every time we create a new row, it just gives it a new unique ID. Now there's a few other fields that I need to create here to make this work properly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a different transformation, a different content transformation for each step in this process. When we apply the YouTube workflow, we need to transcribe it. And then we need to run ChatGPT for 2 different processes, one to create the description and one to create the title. And then we need to set the status back so that we can do a manual edit. And then that manual edit needs to be reviewed by quality control. And then we can finally call it approved so that we can move on to the YouTube bundle. So let's go back to Airtable. I'm going to go ahead and rename this, just call it transformation. We can leave it as a single line text. And then because I'm going to be calling make.com for that automation, I need to create a webhook. So before I can do that, I need to create a new scenario, a new automation. And what we need to do here is create a way to trigger these different automations. So I'm going to create a webhook. I'm going to do a custom webhook here. We'll go ahead and add. It's going to give us a URL. So this is going to give us a URL that we can call from Airtable so that we can actually call make.com and perform these transformations on the content that is in our system. So let's jump back over to the content transformations. That means I need a remote URL for make.com. So I'll call this the webhook URL. We will just use a URL. So for the first transformation, we needed to create a YouTube title and description. We're going to call this remote URL to perform that. And we don't need a status. And then we can jump back over to content. And what I'm going to need to do is, in order to apply a specific transformation to a specific row here, I'm going to need to add a field that will allow me to apply specific transformations that I create over here. So let's go back over to content. I'm going to add another field. We're going to link to another record. We're going to use content transformations. I'll go ahead and call this transformations, create field. We don't need to add any lookup fields right now. Now that we have this column here for transformations, we need to make it so that if we apply a transformation here, that it will actually use this content and trigger this remote webhook to get this work done. So right away I can see in our content tab, we're going to need a spot for a description and a title. But first, one thing that I'm noticing here is that the name that is coming through on this linked record is 1 because that is the main ID that we are using in this table. So I think it would look a bit better if the transformation was the primary column so that when we are over in other tables, that we'll see the actual transformation instead of just an ID. So I'm going to come back over to content transformations and I'm going to edit this. I'm going to make this a single line text and we're going to call this the transformation. I have to call it 1 just for a second. I will cut and paste this over here. I'm going to delete these rows and then I need to add a new ID, auto incrementing ID. Incrementing ID is important and I'll show you why in just a second. So we'll add that ID back. I'll move it over here just so it's in plain sight. I can delete this column, then I can rename this one and remove the 1. I had to add that 1 because it was a duplicate name. So now we're looking a little bit better here. We can see that ID 4 from the content table is also linked here. We don't really need to see that here, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that. And then if I come back over to content, we're going to see the transformations that we need to apply are YouTube title and description. So now the next step is, okay, so we had this workflow that I applied before, but we need to apply this transformation anytime this workflow is selected. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the workflow and I'm going to remove the transformation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to automations here and I'm going to create my first automation. I'm going to add a trigger and then I'll say when a record matches conditions. I think this will work just fine. We'll select a table and then we'll say when the workflow is YouTube video. Let's take the next step. We're going to update the record. We're going to, again, update a record in the content table, and we are going to select a row. We can come down here. And what we really want to do is we want to update the row that was from the trigger here. So we're going to use this when a record matches condition step. And we're really just looking for the Airtable ID right here. Once we have that, we can choose fields. I'm going to update the transformations. And now I need to add the different transformations that I want to execute when we are using the YouTube workflow. So I need the ID for that content transformation. I'm going to add another row just so I can get access to it. There is a hidden ID that Airtable uses that isn't displayed by default, but if you want to get access to it, all you have to do is come down and add a formula. We'll call it the record ID, and all you have to do is return the record ID, create the field, and now we have the actual ID. So I can grab this, I can jump back over to the automation, come back to the update record, and then I can apply this ID here. And then what I will do is I'm going to come back over to the data. I'm going to go to the content. I'm going to apply the YouTube video workflow. I'll come back to the automation and choose a record so I can test this. And then we'll move to the next step and I will run as configured so I can actually test it. I'm going to run it. Looks like it updated it. So if I come back to the content, it now automatically applied that transformation. So now if I come back over here and I turn this automation on, anytime I add that workflow, it should automatically apply that transformation. And there you go. So we're making good progress here. I'm going to go ahead and delete these rows that we don't need. And so now what we need to be able to do when a row is assigned a new transformation, we need to actually call that transformation. We need to call that webhook over on make.com and then actually do these different transformations that we said we wanted to do. So that's going to require us another automation. I'm going to come back over to the automations tab and then I'm going to create a new automation. And in this case, we have to create a new trigger. trigger. In this case, I'm going to go with when a record was updated. Select the table, content. And so now we can further refine it. We can say which record was updated, and you can even apply a specific field. So then you can say only trigger when a certain field of a record was updated. So in this case, I'm going to pick the transformations. So now when the transformation is updated, this automation will run. So now what we need to do is call that remote webhook in this automation that we are building. And now that I realize that when we added the transformation to the content tab, we were given that option to create a lookup field that we skipped. And now we need to add that because we need this webhook URL in the content tab in order to finalize this automation. So I'm going to go ahead, come to this transformation here. I'm going to say add lookup fields, and then I'm going to come down here to the webhook URL. I'm also going to grab the ID as well. I'll go ahead and add those two fields. And what you'll see here is we have added two extra fields, which are coming from the content transformation table. So if I come back over to content, and let's say I removed this, you're going to see these two fields went blank, right? But if I add that back, it's pulling in these values from this table. Over here, we have ID1 and the webhook. So now when we are in our automation here, we will have access to those needed fields in the content table. So now we can go ahead and move on. I'm going to run a script so that we can actually call a remote webhook. You can actually write some JavaScript code here. So after you add this step here, you will be able to edit the code. I've put some code in here, which I'll walk you through. Essentially, all it's doing is it's taking the record ID from the row that is in question, and we're talking about row here. It's taking the ID from this row, and it's also taking this webhook URL, and it's going to send that request over to make.com. So let's jump back over to the automations. We're going to edit the code. We have to add a couple of input variables here that we are using in the script. We're going to be using the webhook URL. So we need the record ID, and the value is going to come from the first step again in this process, which is when that record is updated. So we're going to grab that Airtable record ID, and then we need to add one more input variable here for the webhook URL, and I'll just call it webhook URL, and that value is also going to come from that record here. So I'm going to scroll down. You can just type webhook. There we go. I'm going to grab the actual value. We don't want the linked record ID. We want the actual value. That's the URL that we added into it. And now what this code is doing is it's taking that record ID and it's going to grab, I'm going to grab params dot webhook URL. And now it's constructing a URL that we can post to make.com. It's taking that URL and appending a record ID, and then it's going to actually call that request so that make.com can get it. So let's go ahead and test this. We'll run the tests. We're going to grab row 4 here. It's going to test that script. The test was run successfully. So it's grabbing the URL that we created in this step here. So if we come here and we look, saying BLF, right? So we have the right URL, and it's also sending the record ID from the content row here. So this row here, it's sending the content. So if I come back over to make here, so then I'm going to go ahead and save this. Then we can run it once. Then I'm going to come back over to Airtable, back to the automation, and then I'm going to test this action again. We jump back over to make. We should see that request come through. And now we do. And we have that record ID. So the first thing I want to do is I need in make.com, I need to load this record so that then we can start to process it. We can start to grab these IDs, load up the video ID. We can start to transcribe it. And then we can go through a process to actually perform this workflow that we have here. We're going to execute this workflow, this transformation here, and deposit in a description and a title. And again, I remember that I needed to add a description, and we'll make that a long text description. Oh, looks like I need a YouTube description. And then I will need another long text. We can put in some titles, YouTube title. So now we have those, and then we can jump back over to make.com. And now we can go ahead and load up the Airtable record. So I'm going to add another module, type Airtable. We're going to get the record, going to pick the base, workflow and transformations. Now it's asking us for the table. We're going to look up a record in the content. Now we need that record ID. So now all we need to do is pass the record ID that we sent to step 1, which was in this script automation here. It sent us the record ID. So now I'm going to use that. We can grab it right from here. And now all of the steps we add past here will have access to all of the data in this row here. So now as we start to design this here, what we're going to see is the first thing that we do is we transcribe the video. And then it looks like we have two different processes here that are going to run. They can run in parallel. They'll use ChatGPT to make a description, and then ChatGPT to create a title. So then the first thing I need to do is jump back over to make.com and I need to create that transcription. So let's go into the next step, type ChatGPT, OpenAI. We're going to use ChatGPT Whisper to create a transcription. And so the first thing that it's asking for is the file name and the file data, which we don't have. We don't have the data, right? So we need to take a step before this ChatGPT step here. We need to actually pull that file down into make.com so then we can start to process it. So what I need to do here is I need to add a module. I'm going to use Google Drive. We need to download that file. We're going to download that file here. We'll enter the ID manually and we're going to use the ID from step number 2 here. You can see here we have step number 2 and we have that video ID. We can grab that and we can go ahead and click OK. And now when we go to this step, we will have data from this step that we can actually send to ChatGPT. You can see right here, we have that downloaded file. It now recognizes that. So now we can send it to Whisper in order to process that file and get that transcription so that then we can then process the next steps here, which is to create a description and title for those 2 pieces of the YouTube bundle. So let's go ahead and save this now and just see what happens. It's good to just test these steps as you go. I'm going to jump back over to Airtable, back to the automation, and I'm just going to test this again, but first I got to say run once so that it's actually processing input. Test action. Processing is downloading that file. Now it's sending it to ChatGPT Whisper. So it looks like it had an error. Let's take a look at that. So it looks like the file that we are sending to ChatGPT Whisper in this case is a little bit too large. So in order to get around that, what we might do here is just upload, just for practical purposes, another video into the inbox, which will come into the system. So now you can see we have a new video that is in the system. We're going to go ahead and apply the YouTube workflow so that we get the proper transformation that we need to run. Then I'm going to jump back over to the automations. I'm going to choose a different record. I'm going to choose this one here. I'm going to jump back to make.com. I'm going to run this again, and then I will trigger it again. And then we can see the process again. It found the new row. Now it's downloading that video. Now it's performing the transcription. Now we have a success because we're using a smaller file. Now, if you're working with larger files, that's no problem. You can always put steps in here in the process to convert the video into an audio file, which is much smaller. And then you can send that audio file to ChatGPT Whisper. There are also other services that you can use for your video transcriptions. So now we can continue with the process. At this point here, we have the transcription. So if we come back to our workflow here, we see that we're now going to run 2 different processes, one to create the description and one to create the titles. So I'm going to go ahead and create a router here, which is going to allow us to separate the flow control. I'm going to add a router here. So now you can set it up so each of these different routes will only be executed under certain conditions, but in this case, we always want to implement them. So now the next thing we need to do is we need to create a description. So I'm going to go ahead and add another ChatGPT operation here. And in this case, we are going to create a completion. So we'll go ahead and leave this as it is. We'll go ahead and use ChatGPT 4. We're going to send it a message. We're going to say, take the video transcription and create a YouTube description for posting to YouTube. So we'll go ahead and do that. You'll have to apply a role. So we'll go ahead and just pick system. So when you're sending a request to ChatGPT, it does allow you to send multiple requests in one instance. So if you wanted to create this router after ChatGPT and actually build the description and the title in one step, you could do that. I've already built the router here, so I'll go ahead and call ChatGPT 2 different times, one for the description and one for the title. But you could add another item here if you wanted, and you could get the title and then you could do the route after that. But again, I'm not going to do that because I've already built it out this way. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and then I'll clone this and put it down here. We can go ahead and delete this module here. So now we need to change this to take the video transcription and create 10 different YouTube titles that I can select from. And then let's jump back over to our workflow. And the final thing we need to do is set it up for a manual review. And we'll also need to copy that ChatGPT data back into our description and title. So let's jump back over to make.com, and then we will go to Airtable. We will update a record, workflows and transformations. Table is content. Record ID is going to be from step number 1. And then what we need to do is update the description from this step here. So we will use the choices, messages. So it looks like we don't have data here. So what we might want to do is just run this automation. I'm going to disconnect this so it'll actually run. I'm going to save it. And let's run the automation so that we have data in these 2 steps, so that when we go to configure this Airtable step, we actually have the values to send it. I'm going to go ahead and set this up here. Let's go ahead and see what happens. I will test the action again. Now we have that process running. It's grabbing the video file, then it will make the transcription. Now it's running that transcription through the first ChatGPT prompt. That ran successfully. Now it's running the second ChatGPT prompt, and now that ran successfully. So as I was debugging Airtable a bit, I did realize that I didn't actually post the transcript to ChatGPT, so it came up with something very random. So we need to make sure we actually pass the transcript to ChatGPT. So I'm going to come back over here, give it the text here and say, take the video transcription and create a YouTube description for posting to YouTube. I'll save that. And then we need to do the same here. Take the transcription above, and then we'll actually add that transcription in from the step before this step here. So you can see you have to play with things as you go, and then we'll save it. And then we'll go ahead and run that transcription process again. So then when I look at the data from ChatGPT, look at the output, we have choices here, one here, message. It looks like it created the YouTube description here. In this video, I share valuable insights, and then we had the transcription here, which was, as much as I love technology, you may need to fine tune your prompt to create the proper description. For the practices of this video, we are just showing you the overall automation. So now we can go ahead and connect up this Airtable step and get back to filling out and updating the actual description here. We can go ahead and use, again, the step from step 1. And then we can fill in the description, the choices, messages. We have the content here in this video. Now, the other thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to clear out these different transformations when it actually runs, so that we know that it was actually processed. Remember, we applied this transformation here. So in this integration, probably in this second step here, we're going to want to clear that out so that the transformation disappears. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to duplicate this, clone it, bring it down here, open it up, and then I'm just going to change where we're getting the description. Oh, I also just realized I made a mistake. We're not supposed to update the description. We're supposed to update the YouTube description. So I'm going to come back here real quick, delete that, come back to YouTube description, put that content back in. Then I'll come to this Airtable here, and we're going to update with the title, choices, message, and it looks like there's a few different selections that came up with. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and clear out the transformations. And here, what I want to do is I want to add a null value. So I'm going to come over to these different options we have here. There's null here. That should clear it out when we actually run it. So let's save, get in a place where we can trigger this. And then let's go ahead and go to the automation, test this trigger, running through the process again, creating the YouTube description, updated the row. Now we are going to go ahead and create the titles, and then we update the row. And if we come back to Airtable, the data, notice that the transformation is gone because now we know it actually executed. And then we should be able to come over to the YouTube description. And now we have our YouTube description, and then we also have a few different titles that we can select from, which reminds me that we have a manual edit and review process. So what we're going to want to make sure is when we actually update these Airtable rows that we also set the status to the proper status. So here we have a status here, so we can just come back here and go to review, update. I'll go ahead and save that. I'm going to come back over to the automation here, and we should be able to turn this on, and we can come back to data, go ahead and remove this workflow here as well, just so we can actually see this run. I'm going to turn this automation on. So now this should run without any interaction on our part. Come over here. Let's go ahead and apply the YouTube workflow, which is going to create the transformation, which is going to link up the URL, which is going to trigger this automation, which is going to send it to make.com. We can see that happening now. We have the description, it updated it. Now it's coming up with the titles, and now we updated the titles. Come back over to make.com. We have our description and our titles, and it cleared out the transformations. So awesome. So now I didn't cover the video transformation, and I also didn't cover the thumbnail transformation either, but they are going to follow very similar path. So if you have some automation that you are running that is beyond actually sending it to a video editor, like you're using Opus Clips or doing something like that, or you're using Midjourney for a thumbnail, then you would just simply create that same process in make.com, and it would get triggered in a similar way. You can do the different routes, and you can just process the information as needed. Now, one thing I do want to show you, so beyond the actual transformations, we did talk a bit about also repurposing this for LinkedIn. So we now need another row for LinkedIn. So what needs to happen is not only do we need to update the existing rows with the new data, we also need to create a new row for the LinkedIn workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over to Make. I'm going to add an additional step here. I'm going to go to Airtable. I'm going to create a record, workflows and transformations. We'll create a content row. And now I'm going to copy most everything here. Description, we'll take that from step number 2. Video ID, we just copy everything so that we have the same data. We're just copying it. But this time for our workflow, we will pick LinkedIn video. We'll leave the status assigned blank and we'll leave these blank here. Now, the only thing that we would need to do to create some additional fields for the LinkedIn copy, long text, create field, and come back to make.com. We can do a refresh. We should see those columns now, LinkedIn copy. That's the only other one we really need just for this demonstration. We'll go ahead and click OK. And now we'll go back to Airtable and we will run this process again. I will delete the YouTube description, YouTube title, remove the workflow and the review status, and we will apply it all again. YouTube workflow, going to apply the transformations. It's going to apply the webhook URL. On the back end, we're going to see that execute. Now this time it created a new row for us. So if we come back over to Airtable, we are going to see that we have another content record that is for the LinkedIn video. And so as you might guess, all we need to do is come back over to our transformations, and then we are going to come up with another one for LinkedIn video copy, and then we would create another webhook URL. So we would come back over to make.com. I'll go ahead and clone this so we can do it quickly. This is for the LinkedIn video. We're going to make a copy of the automation, LinkedIn video. It's going to ask us to make a new webhook. It's going to give us that new URL. Save. Come back over to Airtable. We can add this webhook here. We can grab this record here, and we can go to automations, go back to this one here, and we'll go ahead and clone this. And now we'll say if the workflow automation is LinkedIn video, we're going to add a different transformation. We're going to add the LinkedIn video transformation, run as configured, run test, come back over to data, content. Notice that added that transformation. So now that we copied that automation for the LinkedIn video, all we need to do is make the proper modifications to this, and then we will be done. So because this is a LinkedIn video, we only need the copy for the post, and we don't need a description and also titles. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this router here and just use one of these sections here. So I will delete this module here. I will also delete these modules. I'll reconnect this here. I also don't need this second Airtable row, which created the additional workflow. But if we were to come back over to our content workflow and we were also repurposing the LinkedIn video into something else, then we could leave this additional operation here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So now we just need to update the ChatGPT prompt. And we're going to say, take the video transcript above and create copy for a LinkedIn post. We'll go ahead and click OK. We'll save it. I believe when we triggered this here, it already called the make.com automation. So I think there might be one row here that's already ready for us to use. Let's go ahead and run this once. We can go ahead and use the existing data. Again, so because I already triggered this transformation, the Airtable automation that we created that runs the script has already fired off, and make.com is storing that request for us. So we can just say use existing data. It's creating the transcription. Now it's creating the LinkedIn post, and it updated the record. So let's go back to Airtable. And I'm already realizing because we copied the automation, it wrote to the YouTube title. So let's remove that. Go back to the automation. We'll move this to the LinkedIn copy. We can run this again. We will go ahead and use this transformation here. You can see it's going through the process again. Updated Airtable, jump back to Airtable. Now we have the LinkedIn copy. It also removed the transformation, and everything is good to go. And we can also see that both rows were moved to the review status. So if we wanted to just test everything from end to end, we can come back to Make. We can turn on this automation. We can come back to the folder. We can also just quickly rename this one. This was for YouTube. They're all turned on here. So if we come back to Airtable, I'm going to go ahead and delete this LinkedIn row that we created. I'm going to move the status back to nothing. I will remove the description and the title. I'll remove the workflow so that we can start from scratch. So we just uploaded this video into our inbox, and now we're going to apply the YouTube workflow. Notice it's creating that transformation. It's going to call that webhook. We can jump over here. We can see if that's running. Looks like it's running. It's going through our process. It's creating that YouTube description. It's updating that YouTube description. Now it's creating the YouTube titles. It added the titles. Then it added the workflow for the LinkedIn video. If we jump back over here, we see the LinkedIn video. We can see it applied the LinkedIn video copy transformation. It's going to call the webhook URL, come back over to LinkedIn. We can see this process is running. It's already executed. And now we have the LinkedIn copy. So now all you would need to do if you wanted to include different transformations is you would just go through the process of creating those make.com automations. You would add those transformations here, and then you can really automate these different workflows. You can create multiple workflows, and then you can execute these workflows, execute repurposing workflows, really define every single transformation that needs to happen for a given workflow. A YouTube workflow can call a LinkedIn workflow, and then you can execute all the different transformations that need to happen for LinkedIn. And then ultimately you'll have your LinkedIn bundle, and then obviously your YouTube bundle can be sent to YouTube. So there you go. I hope you found this video valuable. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you liked this video. That tells me what type of content you'd like to see more of. And if you'd like another free training that will show you how to build out an Airtable database that will help you automate your content, integrate with your team, send them notifications in Slack, and even do auto posting to platforms like YouTube and LinkedIn and all the various platforms that you publish content to, make sure to check out the next video that I just posted above, and I will see you there.